Vance, you are a fraud. Yes, you. JD Vance, you are a fraud and a very big one at that, the stranger yelled, while standing a few steps away from Vice President JD Vance. He had anger and frustration written all over him. Meanwhile, everyone around curiously waited to see JD's reaction, considering how calm and unbothered he looked. However, as JD rose from his chair, his reaction to the stranger's words shocked everyone and changed people's perspectives about him. Who was this stranger, and how did JD Vance handle the situation? Bizdan Cafe is well known for its sweet pie and well-brewed coffees, especially on the weekends. JD Vance, before he became vice president of Marrakesh, made it a duty to visit Bizdan every weekend. Everyone who had ever worked in Bizdan could attest to the fact that they had seen JD Vance without his regular security details. Bizdan was more than just a cafe to JD Vance. It held his fond memories from childhood till the present day. Just like every weekend, JD Vance was all set for his regular pie and coffee from Bizdan Cafe. It was a chilly October evening in Marrakesh. By chilly, we could say that it was beyond the regular cold they always encountered. People could be seen with their hands tucked in their coats just to keep their fingers warm. Kids had to wear more than 3 layers of clothing to protect themselves from the cold. After instructing his security team to remain in the vehicle and not bother following him inside the cafe, JD Vance walked into Bizdan, and he could see it still had the same spark it had from the very first day he walked in. Bizdan had its usual weekend crowd from those areas and areas around, all excited to get the much-awaited pie and coffee. JD Vance entered and walked to the counter to say hello to the lady on duty. She saw him and was happy he came by that evening. She told the rest of her colleagues, as well as the owner of the cafe, and JD Vance walked into the kitchen to say hi to each of them. They joked for a while before JD Vance went back to the customer area and sat near the back, his seat facing the large window from where he could see the street, and his security detail could keep an eye on him if ever needed. He liked this spot because it gave him a quiet moment to think. Most people who visited that cafe only breezed in and out. They didn't stay as long as old-timers like him and others did, because if they did, they wouldn't give up that seat after seeing the beauty of the community through that large window. There was no need for him to place an order, because they knew what he always had every weekend: a black cup of coffee with 2 cubes of sugar and a medium-sized chicken pie. His order had just arrived while he was savoring the sight of the community. The lady who attended to him told him they tried a new bean for the coffee, and she was sure he would like it. JD Vance could feel the heat of the coffee as he picked up his cup to stir it. The aroma was pleasant. He loved it. He took a sip and dropped his cup down, ate a little from his pie, took out his phone, and scrolled through for anything new. A man entered the cafe at about that same time. He stood for a while as if he were looking for something or someone. His eyes caught the figure seated near the back of the cafe. He walked hastily toward the figure. There was anger on his face. He pushed through the crowd on his way and spilled a few people's coffee while moving. Next, his voice, sharp and loud, stopped everyone in their tracks as he approached JD Vance. Vance, you are a fraud. Yes, you. JD Vance, you are a fraud, and a very big one at that. His words echoed as he spoke. The cafe, brimming with life, fell silent, and everyone paused to understand what was happening. They turned their heads to see who had said such a thing, and noticed a tall, bearded man in a blue jean jacket standing. His eyes were filled with anger and frustration. The door to the cafe swung wide open as Vance's security detail rushed in to keep him safe from harm. JD Vance didn't react. He sat there in his seat as if unfazed by the man's words. He carefully dropped the coffee in his right hand as his security team covered the distance between them and JD Vance. In seconds, the man was pinned down, and JD Vance was surrounded by his security details. He thought about what the man said and felt it, feeling the weight of the man's word and how it affected the cafe. He waved his hand for his people to let the man go so he could say all he wanted to say. JD Vance was not new to confrontations. It was his everyday life ever since he went into politics. However, everything about what this particular man said was different. He could hear the pain in the man's voice, and he knew this was personal. The man took a step closer to JD Vance. Immediately, he was free from the hands of the security and continued what he was saying. You sit here drinking coffee, pretending to be one of us when you're not. Because you are wealthy, you pretend to care about people like me when you don't even care. You do all this just to boost your approval ratings. JD Vance stood from his seat to face the man. He stood there for a while studying the man's face. JD Vance couldn't tell which was more in the man's expression, anger or frustration. The seated customers adjusted in their seats to watch the drama that was unfolding. Other customers who were standing slowly moved to get seats so they could be comfortable and watch what was unfolding. Some remained standing and had their phones out to record the event. JD Vance, seeing how he couldn't tell if it was frustration or annoyance, decided to engage the man in a conversation to know why he made such comments. JD Vance started by asking, "Young man, what is your name?" His voice was calm as he asked the man. The man was shocked by JD Vance's response. It wasn't one he expected, but he stood his ground and replied to the question with his own question. "Why do you want to know my name? Is it so you can make more mockery of me and worsen my case?" JD Vance smiled and showed the man a seat, asking him to sit before he responded. "No, I do not plan to make a mockery of you. I would never do that to anyone because I was also in your shoes at a point in my life. I just want to know who I am talking to." The man was surprised again by JD Vance's second response. He wondered how JD Vance could be so calm about the whole situation. He decided to respond to the first question. "My name is Mike. I hope that makes you happy," he murmured. JD Vance smiled and nodded. "All right, Mike, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Why don't you sit down and tell me why you are so furious and upset?" Mike was shocked that JD Vance was offering him a seat, but he wasn't going to let that melt his heart, and he wasn't going to be fooled, so he thought. "I didn't come here to sit and have coffee with you. I do not want to be branded as one who gets to sit with men who tend to look like they care when they don't." JD Vance laughed as he took hold of Mike's hand and led him to an empty chair across from him. "Have a seat, Mike. I am sure you didn't come all this way just to call me a fraud and go back without answers, so tell me why you called me a fraud, and I will listen and try to provide suitable responses." Customers in the cafe turned to look at each other, some surprised, others curious to know why JD Vance was calm and why he was offering a seat to someone who had just called him a fraud. Mike, on the other hand, was stuck between leaving or taking the seat. He was offered to speak freely without consequences. He looked around to see that the cafe had become calm and everyone was watching, some recording. Mike took the seat. JD Vance also sat down and folded his hands together. "Mike, what would you like to have while we talk?" JD asked as he signaled for one of the attendants to come and take Mike's order. Mike refused, saying he didn't want anything and would like to get done with the conversation and move on with his life. JD Vance asked that Mike be given a cup of coffee and a plate of pie before he faced Mike, whose face clearly showed surprise as his jaw dropped and his mouth was wide open. "Now let's talk, Mike. You have my attention. Why are you so angry?" Though surprised, Mike couldn't resist the offer to talk about what he was going through, but he had to maintain his bravado, so he spoke up. "Why do you suddenly care? You rich folks in politics don't care for anyone other than yourselves." His voice was shaky as he spoke, but he tried to maintain his confidence. JD Vance thought that giving Mike a listening ear would help calm him, but after hearing Mike's new question, he decided to change his strategy and respond. "Mike, I don't know why you have that opinion about all rich people, but I can assure you that there are some of us who actually do care for other folks like you." JD Vance's response got a nod of approval from the customers in the cafe. Some even shouted yes and whispered their reasons for agreeing to what JD Vance said, but that wasn't enough for Mike, who pushed further. "You claim there are other rich folks like you who care about folks like me, but all I have seen even on TV is rich folks like you doing things for folks like me just so they could be recognized." JD Vance laughed, and Mike couldn't understand why. JD held Mike's shoulder and told him that, because some did it, it didn't mean others also did. He patted Mike on the shoulder before continuing what he was saying. "Mike, if you worked for the press, these things I am about to tell you would have made you popular," JD Vance said, as he repositioned himself in his seat. "Mike, I used to be like you, frustrated, angry, tired, and every other emotion that came with those. I remember throwing stones at the cars of the rich in this same community, those days." Vance's words made everyone wonder what he was talking about. Mike gave a look that said he wasn't believing the story JD Vance was about to say. JD Vance asked the manager of the cafe to come out of his office and join in the conversation. "I know you probably wouldn't believe anything I am about to say, so you can confirm with the manager anytime. He and I grew up together. Our fathers were close." The customers were shocked to hear what JD Vance had just said. Some murmured to themselves while JD Vance went on with his story. JD Vance said, "This story is only known to a few, but now I am saying it for the world to hear. Most of you have heard rumors about how my father and grandfather could be related, right? Well, the rumors are not entirely true. Yes, we are a family, but not by blood, but by the bond we share." JD Vance paused and took a deep breath before he continued his story. "My family moved to Marrakesh from Trakoa in the early 70s, and the family who sheltered them was the family who created this same cafe. The love they shared with my family was so massive that my family chose to remain and build that family bond with them. So, from generation to generation, they were together. By the time I was born, it was still the same way." JD Vance took another look around him, and he could see how eager the customers were to hear his story. "It might look like my family had it all when I was growing up, but that wasn't the case. There were days we had nothing to eat. In those times, Bizdan came to our rescue. They also had little, but they were always sharing. There were days when I would get bullied in school, and my family would be unable to do anything about it, but Bizdan would come to the rescue," he said. "I grew up in a house where we had to struggle to survive. My dad lost his job later on, and things went sideways very fast. My dad ended up in the hospital and passed away, leaving me with my mom, who was broken from having to lose her husband. She developed an unhealthy habit, and eventually, I was taken from her." JD Vance's eyes betrayed his strength as tears filled them. Biz Dan took me in as one of their own, and that's how I became a part of their family. I had to grow up really fast, but it wouldn't have been possible if Biz Dan hadn't supported me. Sometimes, I got overwhelmed by emotions and would throw stones at the cars of the wealthy whenever they drove by. Other times, I threw paint at them in their cars, or whenever they weren't home. The manager could tell that JD Vance was becoming really emotional, so he decided to chip in by adding stories of how JD Vance grew up and nearly got sent to juvie, but because he had someone to listen to him express himself, there was no need for that. The manager also added that eventually, JD Vance stopped and decided to change his story, as well as the stories of those around him. He talked about how many times JD Vance failed at politics in the beginning, and how he didn't give up, despite how people looked down on him. The story was so emotional that customers in the cafe began sniffing. Mike couldn't believe his ears. JD Vance, vice president of Darrakesh, had such a story, yet he came out on top. There, Mike decided to open up about his situation. My family owned a diner on the other side of town, Mike started his story. We were happy until some rich folks came around and started buying everything in the area because they wanted to build. The matter was taken to court, and we all lost the case. The judge even asked us to collect whatever compensation we were given. On hearing this, JD Vance raised his head, revealing his emotional face and the tears he was fighting back. Things got rough real fast, and then the bank came, threatened to take the house because we were behind on the mortgage. My brother and I were the only ones left working, and we had to do something about all the expenses. But our paychecks were so small that we didn't have to worry before because we had the diner. My brother got a better job that promised to make things better. As the eldest son, my brother had many responsibilities, and I supported him in any way I could. JD Vance could understand the angle Mike was coming from when he entered and yelled at him, calling him a fraud. Then you came, and we thought you would be the change common folks like me needed to live a better life. You passed bills that seemed like they were beneficial to us, but they were taken advantage of. My brother worked with his new company for more than 5 years, and then one day, he was laid off for no reason. He lost everything overnight. No severance pay, no backup plan, everything just gone like poof, Mike said. JD listened intently, nodding. He tried everything, Mike continued. He applied to hundreds of jobs and took on side gigs, but nothing paid enough to sort the bills, even with what little I earned. Eventually, he sold his truck just to pay up on the mortgage. My parents couldn't handle it. First, my dad passed, and my mom followed. It broke my brother and me, but my brother felt it the most, because everything he did was to make them comfortable. It broke him. And from hearing your story, you know what it is like watching someone you love break a little more every day. JD Vance felt and could relate to what Mike said. He knew Mike was there because he was desperate and because he felt the system had betrayed them. Mike, I can relate to how you feel, JD Vance said as he sat up in his seat. Mike took a deep breath and leaned back in his seat. Then why don't things change? Why do people like you say all the right things, but then folks like me remain the same? No change. JD Vance took a deep breath, thinking about the question before he answered. Change isn't easy, that I can assure you, Mike, he admitted. This shouldn't look like an excuse to you, but I can attest to the fact that the system is slow when it comes to making changes possible. That doesn't mean there aren't some of us who genuinely care and would listen. Mike had doubts about JD Vance, but deep inside him, he knew that JD Vance was being honest because he felt moved too. JD stood up, and all eyes were on him. Thinking he would leave made Mike's mood go through the roof into rage. After all this talk, you won't even proffer a solution, Mike yelled, as JD Vance's back was turned on him. JD Vance looked over his shoulder and smiled at Mike, but kept moving without saying a word. Mike was furious and followed closely behind JD Vance while yelling at the top of his voice. The customers in the cafe felt Mike's pain and wanted to help, but they didn't know how because all JD Vance had done that night was surprise everyone with his actions. JD Vance stopped when he got to the counter where there were sticky notes and took one. He removed the pen he had in his suit and faced Mike. Mike stopped in his tracks. He didn't know what to expect from JD Vance. JD approached Mike, who had stopped moving, and hugged him. Mike was shocked and didn't know how to respond. He didn't know if the hug was a trap for something else. Amid his thoughts, JD Vance asked for his brother's name. Mike didn't know whether to answer or leave. JD Vance released him from his hug and gave him the sticky note and pen, asking him to write his brother's name and give more details about the kind of jobs his brother had ever done. Mike took the pen and sticky note as JD requested. He wasn't sure if he had missed anything, so he handed the pen and sticky note back to JD Vance. JD Vance asked him if he would like a change of job himself, and he thought he was dreaming. He wasn't sure he heard JD correctly. JD repeated the question, and Mike nodded in agreement. JD excused himself to go outside and make a few phone calls. The customers were staring, and most were shocked. He entered the cafe again and told Mike that by the following week, they would meet in that same cafe and talk better, but he had to go as his wife and kids would be worried he wasn't home for the weekend yet. Mike agreed and hugged JD Vance tightly. He could feel good news heading his way. JD Vance left with his security, and customers who recorded the whole event took to the online space. In hours, the videos had gone viral, and Mike had become popular. Mike was getting calls from strange numbers wanting to meet him and his brother. By Monday the following week, Mike's brother had gotten a well-paying job at a respectable company that needed someone with his skill set. Tuesday was Mike's turn to get a job. TV stations and reporters hovered around them just to have interviews. Friday came again, and this time, the cafe was filled to the brim as people waited for the chance to see JD Vance. Reporters had questions they wanted to ask. Mike and his brother sat on one end of the cafe and waited for JD Vance to show up, but he didn't. After what felt like hours of waiting, Mike got a call. It was JD Vance. Mike appreciated him, and they spoke for a while. Before JD Vance hung up the call, he said, "Now it's your turn to help others like you. Gradually, we would bring the change we desire into reality." Mike began to cry after hearing those words from JD Vance and promised to do his best to help those like him. Mike announced that JD Vance wouldn't be coming, and so people who waited started to leave one after another. Mike knew his life would never remain the same. What can you say about Mike's actions and how JD Vance reacted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. You can also turn on your notifications bell to be notified of new posts. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen. See you next time.